Not all mass murderers are as well known as Ted Bundy or the Night Stalker. Here are some more of the most twisted serial killers you may have never heard of. Number 1. The Toy Box Killer.
They think he may have killed dozens and dozens of women, but for 15 years, investigators have failed to find a single body.
David Parker Ray, also known as the Toy Box Killer, was an American kidnapper, torturer, serial rapist, and murderer suspected of killing up to 60 women from Arizona and New Mexico. He earned his name due to the location of his crimes. Ray converted a semi-trailer he called his toy box into a makeshift torture chamber.
He made a taped set of audio instructions, a kind of orientation to prepare his victims for the true nightmare to begin.
Okay, we both know what you've been brought here for. A lot of and your wrists and ankles are chained, and you're gagged because you're not going to like the way I do it.
From 1957 to 1999, Ray kidnapped, raped, and tortured around 5 or 6 women each year in his toy box.
I'm calling for a young lady that ran into the house. She says she's just been raped. She said they've been holding her for 3 days.
He carried out horrific forms of sexual torture, sometimes inviting his wife, friends, and even his dogs to get involved in his twisted crimes. He would often keep his victims prisoner for 3 to 4 months in his soundproof trailer, torturing them with whips, chains, clamps, surgical tools, electricity, and more. Ray enjoyed inflicting pain on his victims so much so that he studied detailed diagrams showing how to inflict pain more effectively.
Even telling the FBI agents that it was difficult for him to be satisfied until he thought of murder.
As well as killing many of his victims, he also let several go, drugging them with barbiturates and dumping them at the side of the road.
I escaped the David Parker Ray incident.
Ray was convicted of kidnapping and torture in 2001, but was never convicted of murder due to no bodies being found. He died of a heart attack about a year after his convictions. Number 2. The HiFi Murderers. The torture and killing of 3 people took place during a robbery at a home audio shop in Utah in 1974. The incident later became known as the HiFi Murders and is known for being one of the most shocking and unprovoked acts of horrific violence in U.S. history. During the robbery, several men entered the store and began taking hostages. Robbers carried out horrific violence against the hostages, including raping an 18-year-old girl before shooting her in the head. The killers also placed a pen in one hostage's ear before kicking it into his head, puncturing his eardrum. Hostages were also forced to drink corrosive drain cleaner when the robbers decided to execute them. When the deaths were taking too long, they decided to shoot them instead. The robbers then left after loading their van up with the loot. After the violence, 3 enlisted U.S. Air Force airmen were convicted. 2 of the robbers were sentenced to death for their crimes, with the getaway driver receiving 5 years to life in prison.
It's hard to find anybody here who did not want to see Dale Selby die.
2 killers were executed in 1987 and 1992. Number 3. Satomu Miyazaki. Satomu Miyazaki was a Japanese serial killer who murdered 4 young girls between 1988 and 1989.
Satomu Miyazaki wasn't just bullied. He was downright isolated and rejected by almost everyone around him because of his funny hands. His youthful trauma also caused him to develop an alter ego, a superhero-like character, someone Satomu Miyazaki called Ratman.
Miyazaki abducted the children aged between 4 and 7 before molesting, dismembering, and eating their bodies. He kept many body parts as trophies and taunted the victims' families after their deaths, sending them postcards.
Miyazaki later turned her bones into powder and later sent them to her family, along with a little note that said nothing but the words, Mari, cremated, bones, investigate, prove, as if he were taunting the police.
Miyazaki molested all of his victims' corpses before taking photos of them. He also drank the blood of one of his victims and ate a part of her hand before dismembering her corpse. Thankfully, he was arrested before his spree could continue when he was confronted while taking nude photographs of a young girl. When the extent of his crimes were discovered, he blamed his actions on the Rat Man. He was diagnosed with several personality disorders, but was found by authorities to be sane and aware of his crimes and their consequences. He was therefore sentenced to death in 1997 and executed by hanging in 2008. Number 4. The East Area Rapist. Joseph James DAngelo Jr. killed at least 13 people and raped at least 51 between 1974 and 1986.
Of July 17th, 1976, my life was changed forever. I was 15 years old.
I was 16 years old at the time.
He raped me.
Originally a burglar, the career criminal regularly broke into homes around California throughout his criminal career. He was known for committing many rapes and murders during burglaries and taunting police and victims with obscene phone calls during the investigations into his crimes. DAngelo carried out extensive reconnaissance on his target homes before carrying out an attack, sometimes unlocking windows and leaving weapons in target homes for later use. He would call victims before or after he broke into their homes to kill or rape them, and once even attended a community meeting about his attacks to look for new targets in the crowd. He regularly targeted couples, forcing women to tie up their boyfriends at gunpoint before raping the woman in front of them. DAngelo carried out his final murder in 1986 but wasn't arrested until 2018. He blamed his crimes on an inner personality called Jerry, who had forced him to carry out his crimes. He was found guilty of 13 murders and kidnappings and sentenced to 12 consecutive life sentences. He remains behind bars to this day. Number 5. The Boogeyman. Born in 1870, Albert Fish was one of the USA's most horrific serial killers. He tortured, raped, and ate at least 3 children between 1924 and 1928. He became known to the public as the werewolf or the Boogeyman due to his shocking details of his crimes. Originally from Washington, D.C., Fish moved to New York in 1890, where he engaged in male prostitution. During this time, he began molesting and raping boys mostly under the age of 6. Fish soon developed an obsession with sexual mutilation, and in 1910, he tortured and castrated Thomas Kedden, a man he later implied was intellectually disabled. He later said of the crime, "I shall never forget his scream or the look he gave me." Over the next few years, Fish raped and killed several children. He was also a cannibal, eating several of his victims. He even sent a letter to the parents of a 10-year-old Grace Budd describing exactly how he chopped her up and eaten her. He was also obsessed with sexual self-harm, regularly embedding needles into his groin and abdomen. He also flogged himself with a nail-studded paddle and inserted wool doused with lighter fluid into his anus and set it alight. Fish was apprehended in December 1934 and put on trial for the murder of Grace Budd. After his arrest, x-rays showed Fish had at least 29 needles still embedded in his pelvic region. He was found guilty and executed by electric chair in 1936 at the age of 65. That concludes this episode. Had you heard of these monstrous killers before? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe for more.